Hi, welcome to the second edition of our Recruiters Insight. From our poll last week, you guys asked me to talk about employee engagement and to give you my insight as to how that's working in the world today. The one thing I'm mindful of saying is I'm not an employee engagement expert, and there is many published, documented articles out there that you can go and read. But let me give you my take on it. The one thing I would say about employee engagement is the definition is all important. It starts with understanding what an employee's maximum satisfaction and where that coincides with an employee's maximum contribution. That, for me, that intersection of those two lines is where we are in the ideal world of employee engagement, and that's what we're aiming to achieve. We fundamentally want every employee to come to work each day and give their best. And we understand that when they do that, they are subsequently committed to an organisation and they align to their goals and values. When we're in that perfect space, we're in harmony, and that is ultimately what employee engagement is all about. So looking at employee engagement, as an HR practitioner, we're responsible for that. But fundamentally, we have to sell to an organisation why it's important. And we have research and we have papers that can talk about an employee engagement affecting the organisation's workforce, their productivity, and ultimately a business success. It was David McLeod who wrote in Engaging for Success that enhanced performance fundamentally was achieved through employee engagement, and that's been borne out through many other researchers and authors. Mark Price, who'd been the CEO at John Lewis for a number of years, in his book, Fairness for All and Unlocking the Power of Employee Engagement, talks very much about the moral side of employee engagement as well as the economic imperative. And he really focuses and drives employee engagement from a well-being and happiness factor that perhaps others haven't quite focused on. So we're talking about a feeling in employee engagement, and one of the difficulties there is how we actually measure that. It's the intangible. There are many tools in the marketplace that have harnessed different ways, scales, percentages to measure, and we certainly would recommend looking at Gallup Q12, Towers Perrin ISR, the Times Top 100 Best Companies to Work For as good indices of how you're faring in that space. They will allow you to look at both percentages and scales. They will enable you to break down your business by unit, geography, function, and division, and fundamentally give you the opportunity to pinpoint what's good and what's bad, where there are different areas in an organisation that are fully engaged and those that are not, and perhaps be able to learn and share some of those experiences. So the key question has to be, how do we actually create employee engagement? Robert Levering, in his book, A Great Place to Work, What Makes Some Organisations So Good and Most So Bad, really found that there was one distinctive feature that was shared by the very good organisations, and he judged those to be the ones that had the most high talent individual and productive employees. He identified that one factor, that shared sense, as being trust. And he said that trust was the foundation of all healthy human relationships, and we should apply that in a working organisation. I think the one thing about employee engagement is it's not rocket science. We're not asking you to put a man on the moon, but however we might look at it, it's definitely difficult. There are key enablers and there are certainly barriers to building employee engagement in an organisation, and again, these are well researched. Your key enablers, I think, start with having a really strong narrative. Everyone in the business really being able to understand what that business is striving to do, how it wants to show up in the marketplace, and what their role is in achieving that position. Engaging with the line manager is key. We spend a lot of time at work, and having people who fundamentally are focused and invested in developing an individual, bringing them on, whether that be behaviourally, culturally, or from a skill set perspective, will all add to driving that engagement piece. Employees having a voice that's heard, and I mean really sincerely heard. I don't mean a one-off lip service employee engagement survey. I mean having the conversation on a regular basis, being listened to, being actioned, being explained why something hasn't been actioned, if that's the case. That is certainly identified as one of the enablers. And finally, having behaviours that are absolutely consistent with your values set. It's all very well talking it, but if you don't walk it, it ain't gonna happen. On the converse side to that, the barriers to an employee engagement might seem obvious now. Leaders who don't believe in employee engagement or don't really understand it and therefore don't value it themselves. Leaders and managers who simply don't know how to do it. Maybe they don't know how to have the conversation. Maybe they dodge it because they think it's going to be awkward. If there's a mismatch perhaps between an individual's cultural aspiration and the cultural reality of an organisation that hasn't been identified, you're never going to achieve that same page thinking. And as I said, an organisation that plays lip service, fundamentally dealing out a survey once a year and then putting it in the top drawer and not doing anything about it, that's going to be a barrier to building that engagement. So the Recruiter's Insight is all about my perspective. And as I said right at the beginning, I'm not the employee engagement expert, but my privileged position as a recruiter gives me insight into how many organisations do it and equally what my own experience has been in that space. I think what we face on day one is, in my opinion, you have one chance to create that first impression, and that's where employee engagement should start. There's only that one chance, and if we get that wrong, it's very hard to build that up moving forwards. I mentioned earlier that the key one factor identified was trust, and establishing trust and building trust from day one in that first experience piece is really important. So, does day one for you, new employee, look like policy, paperwork, extensive use of how to make coffee for everyone, and sitting down with a fairly dull handbook? Possibly, and I would suggest on more occasions than not. And certainly it's been my experience until I started to research this topic. What I think we should be looking at is how we make employees feel. We should be welcoming them as a person to our family, and we should be giving them an experience that they go home and talk about. We need to give them more than they've been promised or more than they expect. So I want you to start thinking about, what does day one look like for a new employee, and how is that the foundation then for you building employee engagement? Let me give you some examples. The John Lewis Partnership, for a start. All employees are called partners. They're not called employees. They are commercially invested stakeholders that from the very heart of the organisation understand what the mission is and where they're going. But day one is not policy and process. Day one is experience. Similarly, the Starbucks organisation. Fundamentally, again, call employees partners and spend the first day coffee tasting. Their product is coffee, and what they want to do is give people a real tangible connection with what it is they're in that business to deliver. Having researched this, my own experience was paper, policy, process, handbook, coffee, and I've just changed that now. So every employee joining our business day one, we go out for breakfast and we're going to have a shared experience. The very different minutiae of walking into an organisation where everyone looks up and greets you, as opposed to having been for breakfast and walking in with the whole team, collectively, collaboratively, chatting informally on the way. That's something that will make that first impression quite different. Employee engagement isn't rocket science, but it does need time, investment and thought, and it needs a leader who really is passionate about it, who can bring it to life. And I hope those thoughts are useful.